Okay, so welcome back to another video, a video reacting to a video. This time it's going to be Oversimplified World War II, a video which, despite having 70 million views, which is crazy for any World War II type content, I have never seen this video before. I don't know how. I've had it recommended to me multiple times. I just never clicked on it. Maybe it was fate that one day I would be able to react to it in this manner and make content, make YouTube videos. But I've never seen. And look at that. Here's Tommy K, right? Reacting to it, right? I mean, there's probably so many people that have made reaction videos to this, but I've never done it before. So I was maybe you guys want to see my take on it. I don't know what's going to come up. I've never seen a single oversimplified video. So not only have I never seen this, I have also never seen an oversimplified video. So this is going to be all new for me. Remember, if you like this stuff, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Currently wearing the VideoLife t-shirt. We do have merch. If you're interested, it should be in the description. And be sure to check out the stream. I go live on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays as of recording this 27 April 2022. So check that out. All right, without further ado, let's get into it.
This video was made possible by Skillshare.
Like every other video.
Churchill was a man with many talents. He was an artist, a butterfly enthusiast, and he had an unpublished manuscript about aliens. Clearly,
Really? Okay. I want to learn more about that.
he was a man with an insatiable thirst for knowledge. Maybe he could have loaded up his computer and logged onto Skillshare, an
Nice.
online learning community with more than 19,000 classes.
That was
in
another
design,
smooth
business,
ad
technology,
transition. So
and
from the
more.
last video on
Perhaps he
What
was
If
considering a
Altist
side career in
and this
fashion,
one,
but didn't know where to start.
okay,
On
yeah.
Skillshare, he would find
some
courses in
very
fashion design
very
and garment
smooth
construction.
ad transitions.
Or if he wanted to learn app design, improve his photography, or just how to
I
make
think that's a
really
hallmark
good
of
quesadilla,
YouTube,
he would have found courses for all of these
of
and
YouTube
more
success is
on
when you can
Skillshare.
successfully
Skillshare gives you access
transition
to
into
high-quality
ads.
classes taught by
There you
genuine
go.
experts.
All right, let's get more into it. Okay. There's the link. Blah blah blah. All right.
Now, without further ado,
Without further ado, as I say as well.
it's 1902. A young man by the name of Benito Mussolini moves from Italy to Switzerland to avoid military service. He
Okay.
gets big into socialism, working for trade unions, writing for socialist newspapers, advocating a violent overthrow of European monarchies, the whole shebang. This gets
As
him in a
one
bit of
does.
trouble with the Swiss police, so he gets arrested, sent back to Italy, set free, returns to Switzerland, is arrested again, goes back to Italy again, completes his military service after previously avoiding it, and then after a brief stint as an elementary school teacher, he finally returns to work as an avid socialist. His speeches and
Isn't that funny that there's a few world leaders that were like that, where they were just like something so innocuous, right? Like Mussolini was a grammar school teacher. I think Tito was like a metal factory worker or something along these lines. I mean, Adolf Hitler famously was a painter, right? But a bit of a vagabond, so to say. So it's just fascinating when you learn about some world leaders and some previous and current world leaders. Not as much current, but definitely former ones. So it's like, yeah, this guy, he was an artist. He was a bricklayer, and then he became, the president of this country. So that's kind of cool, actually.
journalistic abilities made him famous among Italian socialists. He was anti-war, so when Italy colonized Libya in 1910, he rioted and got arrested. Then World War I came along.
Really?
and once again,
Didn't he want to
protested
conquer
Italy's
Africa later?
involvement. But then he thought, wait a minute, this war could bring about the social climate needed to overthrow European monarchies and bring about the socialist revolution everywhere. And suddenly he was pro-war. But his fellow socialists didn't like his new pro-war stance, so they kicked him out of the party. So then he said, you know what? I'm done with socialism. We need something new, not based on class divisions tearing us apart, but based on unity through nationality. We'll conquer the Mediterranean and reunite all Italian peoples, just like the days of the Roman Empire. I'll call it fascismo, and it will guide the Italian nation to greatness. That's all well and good, Mr. Mussolini, but what kind of haircut am I giving you? Let's go with
Bald.
bold.
Nice. Fantastic photos of Mussolini there. Yeah, that's really interesting, actually. That I mean, a lot of this comes out in current political climate of, was the National Socialist Party, the Nationalsozialisten Deutsches Arbeitspartei, right? The NSDAP, otherwise known as the Nazis. Were they a left-wing thing? Were they a right-wing thing? And I think a lot of the time, this sort of left-wing, right-wing divide that we use nowadays can just simply not be applied to like Italian fascism, German fascism, right? Or a lot of the other political systems that existed back in history. I think one of the bad things that we do is we take our current political understandings and we try and paint those onto our history. Right, so I think that that's quite interesting that he was originally a socialist, and obviously he didn't get into specifically what he, like the very specifics of what he believed in, what socialism was for him, but interesting how that sort of like mixes into what fascism is, and kind of cool how that all happened. I didn't know that. I didn't know that he was an avid socialist, so to say. So, all right, this is already 2 minutes in, and this video is 6 minutes long, so I'm going to stop pausing as much, but let's keep going.
Italy had been on the winner's side in World War I, and they hoped they were going to get a lot out of it, but in the end, they only got a little, and they felt cheated. On top of that, a bad economy and weak governments meant that the Italian people were a little unhappy. So when Mussolini came along and said that he could fix everything, his fascist movement gained a lot of support. In 1922, he went to the king and said, "Make me prime minister, or I'll make me prime minister."
Ah, yes, the famous March on Rome.
This army.
Yes. That's a really nice building, by the way. I've been there before.
Establishing
Highly
a
recommend.
dictatorship with himself at its center. Europe had its first fascist dictator. Next up, Germany. Germany had been on the loser's side, and they got absolutely wrecked by the Treaty of Versailles. They lost territory, had to demilitarize the Rhineland, had to reduce their army to just 100,000 men, couldn't have an air force, had to pay the Allies a huge amount of money that it didn't have, and a new rule was established that every Englishman withheld the right to walk into the center of Berlin, pick out any German they wanted, and spank the hell out of them. I made that last one up, but it helps you understand how all this felt to Germans. On top of that...
Oh, and what's interesting too is that if I remember correctly, and I might not have the year right, but if Germany had have continued to pay the war reparations from the Treaty of Versailles, I think they would have paid them off in like the early 2000s. I want to say it was 2010, or maybe it was 2004 or something like this. It would have been within my lifetime, right? They would have been paying off their war reparations still. So.
Bad economy and weak governments meant that when a small angry man with a silly mustache came along and said that he could fix everything...
Okay, I see why these are so popular.
Hitler had been
This is clever.
During World War
This is really
I,
clever.
And he was crazy patriotic. And nobody was smarter than him about Germany's humiliation.
Wait, isn't that... Hold on.
And he was...
It looks like the Belgian flag.
Crazy patriotic. And nobody was madder than him.
I know they're the same colors, but like the way he made them, it looks like the Belgian flag.
And in 1923, attended a march on Munich with his boys.
Yes.
And then he got arrested. But his popularity grew and grew, and in 1933, the president made him chancellor.
What's the interesting thing, too, is that after the putsch actually arguably made him more popular. There's a really great book that I read by Sir Ian Kershaw, which is called Hitler. It's a biography on Hitler. And the NSDAP was really tearing itself apart when Hitler was in jail. Right, there was differences between the South, between the North, between the Central German, sort of the subdivisions of the party, and it really was leaderless while he was in jail. And Hitler, being Hitler, he was quite a lazy bastard to put it lightly. He really didn't do anything, and the party almost split itself apart. But because Hitler was released early, he was able to sort of reunify the party and get the mission out, because he was supposed to be in there for I think 4 years in jail for trying to overthrow the state, and they let him out in 6 months. Obviously I could talk for an hour about all the surroundings of this, but I just wanted to put that little footnote in that really there were a couple times that if Hitler had if he had stayed in for maybe 2 years or 3 years or something, who knows what the world would look like, right? Who knows? So.
And then he got arrested. But his popularity grew and grew, and in 1933...
And his popularity grew because during the trial, he was able to basically... he was basically able to use it as free publicity, where he was able to speak about his ideals and what he wants politically, and he was really able to make the court into a minor political rally. And given how much press there was given to the trial, he was really able to get his ideals out there too, particularly in Bavaria, in the south of Germany. So yeah, the trial really was a giant marketing ploy, so to say, or it worked out in his favor that it was a marketing ploy for a young Charlie Chaplin impersonator.
The president made him chancellor. He believed he was Germany's great destined savior, and he went full megalomaniac, establishing a dictatorship with himself at its center. Europe had fascist dictator number 2. Hitler and Mussolini had a lot of the same ideas, but more importantly, they had the same enemies, and they started to get along. Anyone else want to be friends? Franco? No?
Nope.
You good? I do. Who's that? It's Japan, and they've taken over northern China. Let's rewind a bit. Japan had isolated itself from the rest of the world for over 200 years until the Americans showed up and said, you're going to trade with us and you're going to like it. Then the Western powers imposed a bunch of unequal treaties, meaning Japan's economy was bust. They also had no natural resources, so they decided
I like how the Englishmen are like, they look like something out of South Park.
to go get some. They went to war with China to gain a sphere of influence over Korea, and they took a bunch of China's stuff. But then the West said, hey, cut that out. And since Japan couldn't take on the West, they said, okay, I guess we'll just go home. Wait a minute, what are you doing? Taking advantage of a weakened China and setting up spheres of influence. But I was the one who weakened them. We know. And you guys didn't let me have anything. We know. That seems unfair. We don't think so. Okay, see ya. So Japan thought, screw this, and went to war with Russia, and stunned everyone by actually winning. Then they fully annexed Korea, but they didn't stop there. In World War I, they took Germany's colonies and islands in Asia. And then in an incident...
And mind you, they were on the Allies' side in World War I.
That was maybe staged by the Japanese army, a bomb blew up a Japanese train in Manchuria, giving them an excuse to launch an invasion and take over. So here's the situation. Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and Japan all believe they're racially superior, all feel hostility towards the Allies, and all want to militarize and take over more stuff. And so they did. Let's start.
Oh, man. I know it's called Oversimplified. I get it, so I'm not going to sit here and be like, well, it's more complicated than that. Even though I am going to sit here and say it's more complicated than that. Though... I think that's a good start. I think what's really fascinating, though, is that I hope that these videos can really get people into World War II, and then you can really get more into the issues of each individual country, right? Japan wanting to conquest an empire, not having the empire that France and Britain had. And Italy wanting to conquer its own empire too. I recently read an interesting article that a historian, I don't remember his name, sorry, this was in the Atlantic though, is arguing that it really was a conquest of colonialism, right? Is that it was really World War II. A lot of the times they consider World War I to be the death of empires. However, this historian, I don't remember his name, sorry, but he considers World War II to be the death of empires, with, Germany expanding east for Lebensraum, right? Italy wanting to expand its Mediterranean empire, creating a Mediterranean empire, creating the Roman Empire again, and Japan wanting the resources in Southeast Asia and conquering Chinese lands, right? As it had with Manchuria. So, yeah, I think this is great. Actually, I really like this video so far. It's really surface level, and that's the point, obviously. But so far, yeah, I'm really digging this. It's good. It's good.
With Germany. Hitler hated the Treaty of Versailles, and now he was ready to begin undoing it. In complete violation of the treaty, the first Luftwaffe squadrons were set up, conscription was introduced, and he pimped up his army. The Allies did nothing. Then Hitler sent his army back into the demilitarized Rhineland, giving orders to immediately retreat if the Allies showed up. The Allies did nothing.
Yep, and that is one of the things that when I was reading Kershaw's book on Hitler, you just sit there and you go, oh man. The thing is that if France had have done anything, and it's not like France didn't have the army there. It's just, I don't know, you can only sit there and really think what would have happened, right? With Hitler would have been completely embarrassed by having retreated out of the Rhineland, but instead he marched right into the Rhineland and just cemented his own victory through this. So, yeah, just sad.
With his military re-strengthened, he could now move on to step 2. He wanted to rapidly increase the Aryan population, and to do so, he needed Lebensraum, or in other words, he would have to
Lebensraum.
Take over the world. But for now, a good portion of Europe would do, and he began eyeing up his neighbors. The Allies finally started to get worried, so they implemented a fairly useless diplomatic strategy called appeasement, and it went a little something like this. Hitler would say, I want that thing, and the Allies would say, you can't have that thing. Okay, you can have that.
Okay, so for Austria specifically, that was actually more against the Italians, right? Hitler actually needed more of the permission of Benito Mussolini, who considered that Austria would become sort of a puppet state, right, for his new Roman Empire. So one of the things that Hitler actually needed to consult was Mussolini, more than trying to consult the Allies for Austria or anything. But obviously this would apply to like Czechoslovakia and other things like this.
Thing, but no more. I want that thing.
Yeah, there you go.
And repeat. In 1938, Hitler's army marched into Austria and just took it, with no resistance. Boom, this is Germany now. Next,
Except for Mexico. Mexico is the only country that complained to the United Nations. There's a really good History Matters video on this too. Mexico was the only country that complained to the United Nations, or the League of Nations, sorry, about the annexation of Austria. And to this day in Vienna, there's a place called Mexikoplatz, which is like, Mexikoplatz, place of Mexico. I don't know. Mexikoplatz, you all get it. And it's set up specifically because Mexico was the only nation that protested this to the League of Nations.
Datenland, an area of Czechoslovakia with many ethnic Germans. The Allies held a meeting.
So this is around 1938 when you take the focus?
Hang on. This meeting is about my territory. Shouldn't I come to the meeting too?
Nah, you're not invited.
Anyway, we're going to give you what you want. Really? Yeah.
Yep.
Just like that?
Yep.
What's the catch? Just sign this piece of paper.
Peace in our time,
so
gentlemen.
Invade the rest of Czechoslovakia. Okay. Then Chamberlain returned home
Peace
to
in our
Poland,
time.
waving his signed piece of paper in the air, declaring crisis to be averted and the continuation of world peace. And we built a statue of Chamberlain in his honor. And every day on the 30th of September, we celebrate Chamberlain Day. Hitler's invading the rest of Czechoslovakia.
This is good.
What? He's invading the rest of Czechoslovakia. Oh. You lied to me. What do you expect? I'm Hitler. Not to be outdone, Mussolini also wanted to get in on the action. He thought to himself...
I mean, what I think is an interesting thing to study too at this point is, was appeasement justified? Right? And I think there are certain terms where you can argue that appeasement was justified, and I'm not going to get into that because that's a totally different topic. And maybe that's a video that I could react to. So if you know a YouTube video that's like, was appeasement justified, they can get into it. Maybe we can talk about that. But it's an interesting way to look back at the past and to argue whether appeasement of certain issues that Hitler wanted was justified. For example, maybe Sudetenland, right? And which ones were not, such as the annexation of Austria and other things like this, or vice versa, depending on what you believe.
Isn't there a not yet colonized nation somewhere which is so underdeveloped that the people would be defending themselves against our tanks with literal bows and arrows and wooden spears? Oh, there is?
1936.
Fantastic. And so he took it. Italy also wanted to control the entrance to the Adriatic Sea, so they occupied Albania. Then, in another incident which was maybe...
Well, okay. All right. I'm going to be doing this every time, and I'm going to be totally missing the point here, but you guys already know Albania, right, with King Zog, was practically an Italian puppet through economic means. Okay. It's called Oversimplified, VideoLife. It's called Oversimplified.
Staged by the Japanese. Gunfire was exchanged by Japanese and Chinese troops at the Marco Polo Bridge, and the Japanese launched yet another invasion against China. They swept through Beijing.
Toy 4 really
Shanghai,
is like
and
a
then
good
advanced to the
educational
Yangtze Valley
tool
to
if you
China's
play
then
it
capital,
historically.
Nanking. It was here that
Like just on the most
Japan's
basic
shocking
like levels,
atrocities
just the basic
committed against
focuses.
the Chinese people. Back in Europe, Germany and Italy made their relationship status official by signing the Pact of Steel. Then, Hitler turned his eyes towards Poland and the hated Polish corridor, splitting Germany in two. At this point, the Allies really had to put their foot down, and they warned him that an invasion of Poland would mean war. Hitler had planned to continue his advance eastward, but he didn't want to end up fighting a war on two fronts. So for now, he made an alliance with Stalin, saying, how about we both invade Poland and split it between the two of us, and I definitely won't not refrain from not betraying you sometime in the future. Sounds... good. This new alliance stunned the West. On the 1st of September...
Not only stunned the West, it stunned Germans themselves. Right? I remember reading this this interesting part in the book where I think they had the flags of the Soviet Union. I don't remember if they had to take them from some... There's this really interesting... There's something about the flags that they had in Berlin for the Soviet Union, and they didn't have access to them because they had them all... I don't exactly remember off the top of my head, but there's a really interesting story about when it was signed and how stunned really like the whole world was by this pact, right? Because Hitler had been going off for, at this point, decades, and known to the world for years about Bolshevism, right? And being completely anti-communist. And then to just stun the world and to sign this treaty, I mean, it's really quite,
1939,
it's really quite
troops
unexpected.
entered Poland, and Britain and France declared war
here we
on
go.
Germany. The Poles fought hard, but they were no match for the two giants crashing down on them from either side. Then came a period known as the Phony War, where everyone just sort of sat around not doing much. The French had launched a small invasion into the Saarland, but they maintained mostly defensive positions, and after a while decided to just turn around and call it a day. Speaking of France, the French were still super proud of their victory in World War I, and they hadn't really moved on from it. They still used horses, they dispatched messages by motorbike instead of using radio, orders from the commander-in-chief were usually pretty vague, and the troops were rarely inspected.
Okay.
They built a line of defenses along their German border, but didn't bother extending it all the way to the Channel, and they wouldn't launch artillery strikes against Germany out of fear of being retaliated against. In the war, they didn't want to attack the enemy. And at first the UK wasn't much better. Chamberlain still naively hoped that the war could be ended diplomatically. Instead of bombing raids, the RAF dropped propaganda leaflets over German cities, which one air marshal said likely did nothing but provide the continent with toilet paper for the duration of the war. They also only sent 200,000 men to France, while the French had mobilized millions. Both Britain and France wanted to avoid a repeat of the First World War, and so they wanted to keep the war as far from home as possible. So they turned their eyes north, towards Norway. Neutral Sweden was exporting iron ore to Germany through neutral Norway, so the Allies asked them if they could please stop exporting iron ore to Germany, but this request was refused. Then, the Soviet Union attacked Finland, so the Allies said, how about we land troops in Norway and move them across Sweden to go help out your good pal Finland, and along the way maybe take control of all your airfields. But Norway and Sweden still said no. So the UK mined the waters around Norway to force any transport ships into international waters, and they also attacked a German tanker they found in the area. Hitler realized what the Allies were up to, and he quickly...
Yeah, and what's crazy too is that when and I'm sure they'll get into this in a minute, but when the defense of Norway was so botched by the British, it was really quite embarrassing.
He moved to secure his supply of iron ore. He launched an invasion through Denmark into Norway.
And the Denmark invasion lasted a whopping 6 hours. So there were some Danes, multiple Danes, who went to bed, and they were a completely independent country and woke up occupied. 6 hours. That's all it took.
Allies rushed to land troops at key ports along the coast, but Germany had taken control of Norway's airfield, and their air superiority decided the fight. The Allies had to retreat. After this slightly embarrassing failure, Chamberlain resigned and was replaced with Winston Churchill, who had a slightly different approach to dealing with the Germans. Hitler's overall strategy was similar to Germany's First World War strategy. Attack France, defeat France, knocking out the UK in the process, then turn on the Soviet Union and win the war. During the phony war, the Allies had given Hitler time to prepare his forces. Now, he was ready to attack. The Allies had wanted to place troops in Belgium, but Belgium had refused, and in a move that surprised pretty much no one, Hitler launched an invasion to get around France's defenses. The Allies charged into Belgium at full speed to meet the German invasion head-on, and it looked like...
No, you can't do that. You have to have the tiles, right? You got to get the tiles here because they're forested tiles, right? So they have better defensive tactic.
Like a repeat of the First World War was coming.
Bad boy for joke.
Hitler had a trick up his sleeve. Blitzkrieg. As the Germans advanced, they sent thousands of refugees westward, slowing down the Allies. Then, to the south, the French had left the Ardennes, an area full of hills and forests, pretty underdefended because they thought it was naturally impenetrable. Well, the Germans were about to penetrate it with everything they had. They smashed 50 Wehrmacht divisions through and encircled...
Yeah, and what's crazy too is that the Ardennes plan, I mean, on paper sounds absolutely insane, right? It sounds completely insane. And a lot of the general staff that Hitler had was completely against the idea, right? Because it sounds nuts. It's not like a lot of things we can look back on in history and go, oh, well, yeah, obviously, right? But this is something where, you know, if you can look at it at the time, you're like, yeah, why would you, right? Why would you?
The Allied armies at lightning speed.
Well, that's why.
The best of the Allied forces were now trapped. The Germans squeezed in from all sides, taking out France's best armies and nearly wiping out the British too. But they managed to make a desperate last-minute escape at Dunkirk, with British civilian ships even making the perilous journey to bring their young men home. With most of the French forces depleted, the Germans breezed through, taking Paris, and France fell. What the Germans couldn't do...
What's interesting too is that there's quite a lot of people say that the Allies, that Hitler let the Allies get away at Dunkirk, right? Which is actually a bit of a myth, that the panzer divisions that were near Dunkirk did not actually advance into it, right? To try and sort of finish off, so to say, the last of the remaining troops. It wasn't that he let them go out of him being a nice guy and wanting his enemies to return home, but it was rather out of a bit of communication failure that the Allies were able to escape.
In World War I, Hitler had done just like that.
Yeah.
Hitler hoped that with the fall of France,
Crazy.
the UK would also lose hope and sue for peace. But quite annoyingly, it didn't, and he needed to secure the Western Front, so he tried
Quite
to force them into
annoyingly.
submission with mind games. The UK were now all alone, and Hitler wanted to emphasize that. First of all, just before France fell, Italy finally declared war on the Allies, making the UK's situation even worse. Next, instead of just occupying all of France, Hitler occupied the coastal areas for defense, but allowed France to continue its existence as a German puppet state. This way, it looked like the UK's old ally had decided to switch sides. Hitler also hoped that the UK wouldn't attack any of her old allies' navy bases or colonies in Africa, giving Hitler an extra line of defense to the south. But the UK made sure to respond to this by sailing down to France's navy base in Algeria and wrecking a bunch of ships.
Yes.
So have at it.
And not only wrecking a bunch of ships, but killing thousands of French sailors too, which is something that the French government, not the fascist French government, but the French government in exile was absolutely furious about. Right? We always say, oh, they just damaged some ships, but it's like, no, they killed thousands of people too.
Hitler then began laying down plans for an invasion of Great Britain.
However, whether this was necessary is obviously up for debate.
Before German troops could land on British soil, he would first need air and naval superiority across the Channel. Waves of German bombers came, while the completely outnumbered RAF worked bravely around the clock in an attempt to quell the German attacks. At first, the Luftwaffe targeted British ports and coastal facilities. Then it attacked RAF bases, crippling the RAF's ability to defend the nation. And it looked like Hitler's Great British Invasion was coming. But then, Churchill ordered a small, pretty insignificant bombing raid over Berlin. It didn't do much damage, but Hitler was furious, and he immediately ordered the Luftwaffe to refocus its attacks on civilian targets in London. Children were sent off to the countryside, away from their parents to avoid danger, and frequent trips to air raid shelters became a daily occurrence. But British morale held firm. Smiling, knitting, lounging casually, these people have balls of steel.
So actually, my grandparents remember that. Unfortunately, both of them are passed now, but they were in Britain at the time, and my grandfather eventually was in the British Air Force, and he was in Burma. He worked on helicopters, which were used eventually for medical transport. And they remember the bombing raids, and it was just something that they just sort of, what could you do? You just sort of accepted it, right? You just sort of did your thing, and it was obviously very annoying, but there was nothing that they could do, so they just kind of stiff upper lip and went on with it, which is, I mean, I can't even imagine that happening nowadays. Unfortunately, I should preface that and say, unfortunately, I can due to the situation in Ukraine that's happening at the time of this recording. It's something that I can't imagine happening here, but you never know.
Refocusing on London also gave the RAF breathing space to reorganize, so Hitler kind of shot himself in the foot there. Just the foot for now.
Ah, nice. I was literally just going to say that joke. I was going to say, for now.
Finally, the Luftwaffe sent one massive all-out attack on London, and the RAF successfully repelled it, destroying many of the German aircraft and placing air superiority firmly in British hands. Hitler's invasion had to...
Now, not only air superiority, too, but more importantly is naval superiority, right? I think that's a lot of things that people think. It's like, oh, what about Sea Lion? What about... But just the invasion of Normandy, D-Day, happened with air superiority and naval superiority, and was the largest, I think still the largest naval invasion of all time. The amount of logistics that went into D-Day is absolutely, the scale of it is just ginormous. And so to think that the Germans could have done this in 1940 without naval supremacy and with fighting for air supremacy. So even if we assume that they had air supremacy, right, that naval supremacy is just absolutely critical to have. So I don't think really in any reality that this would have been possible. I don't think so. That Hitler's invasion is coming. It's like, yeah, maybe psychologically, but never was a chance in my opinion.
To be postponed, but the bombing of British cities continued for some time.
Yes. Oh, and by the way, my grandfather and grandmother, they were in Manchester. Fascinating. Okay, so that was a really, really good video. I can see why this guy's videos are so popular, because that was great. I mean, that was a great, great overview of it. If someone knows nothing about World War II, then this is something that's really good to get into. And what I think is fun is going to that next level, right, and reading some books about it, right, just learning more about the war and going from there. So thank you all very much. I'm going to do part 2 next. And that one, crazy. This one has 70 million views, and then part 2 has 46 million views. Wow. So I'm going to do part 2 next. Hope you enjoyed this one. Let me know in the comments if I missed something, if you disagree with me on anything. Yeah, anything like that. Any more videos, be sure to join the Discord. Put them in the suggestions channel. And yeah, that's pretty much everything. So thank you all very much, and I'll see you in the next video.